It's strange how a simple black phone hidden in the back of an old wardrobe could tear my family apart more swiftly than the loss of any inheritance. I remembered the exact weight of it, heavier than the house deeds or the funeral documents, as if it pressed into the lines of my hands with every secret it carried. I thought the truth was safe in my grip, but later I would learn how easily truth can slip through your fingers and stand quietly, just out of reach. I'm 68 now, a widow for more years than I expected, the mother of 2 daughters who walked most of life's road right by my side. My husband left early, and so I stayed with my own mother, sewing from a cramped half-basement room, the hum of my machine echoing around us. Those fingers patched quilts and winter coats for my aging mother, and stitched up, one by one, the holes in my own life. My mother's eyes faded with age, but never her wits. Life, of course, always finds its season to turn cruel. Years ago, my younger brother, Young-soo, lost everything in a failed startup, and ever since, the subject of money settled on our table with every meal. As the oldest, I pitched in. My mother offered bits from her pension too. We acted like it was nothing, but years later, I realized our hearts had tipped off balance long before any of us would admit it. When my mother passed, what she left was simple: a few documents, an old house, and the gaze of those who survived her. The dust had barely settled after the funeral before the talk of inheritance filled the silences between us. Some of us counted who stayed by her side longer. Some, mostly my brother, wanted to tally every cent spent on hospital and caregiving, like a bill that demanded settling. I resisted selling the old house. My girls had taken their first steps on those floors. I could still hear my mother slicing her radishes in that kitchen. But my son-in-law, Min-soo, always so practical, insisted it was time to be realistic. A word that sounded cold and sharp in my ears, all numbers and no warmth. Starting then, the phrase in-law conflict began to appear again and again in my diary. Months of tension and math followed. Min-soo produced charts and lists, at the bottom in barely visible print. Liquidate, distribute, finalize. How tidy, I thought, as if cutting old ties could be as neat as words on a spreadsheet. I said nothing, but inside my resentment grew like a knot, tightening every day I bit my tongue. Everything changed the day I found it. The little phone, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, in my mother's old wardrobe, smelling of mothballs and time. My shock turned quickly to suspicion. The phone was charged just enough to turn on. Dozens of bank notifications flashed by. My breath stopped when I saw a familiar name, Min-soo, my son-in-law, listed on transfer after transfer. Wild thoughts swirled in my head. Had my mother tried to pass the house to my son-in-law, right under everyone's nose? Had she, in secret, bargained away our family's greatest treasure, just to cover Young-soo's debts? The more I scrolled, the deeper my suspicions ran, twisting into certainties. Surely, I thought, this explained everything. Min-soo had become the center of our family. And now, he sought to claim what little was left. It was only a matter of time before this came to a head. Our next family meeting felt less like a gathering and more like battle. I laid down the phone and the transfers, demanding my long-held questions be answered. Faces stilled. Some turned hard, others incredulous. Min-soo was clearly shaken. My younger daughter Jong-hee tried to calm me, and Young-soo sat in silent denial, his muteness intensifying the confrontation. My insistence grew heated, feeding the flames of our already smoldering inheritance dispute. Old resentments layered onto new ones, the years of debt, my refusal to sell, and Minsu's push for his version of fairness. Youngsu's silent claim that he'd done more for our mother was met by my mental arithmetic, counting each lone and sleepless night. We raised our voices, if only inside ourselves. I clung to that phone like it was proof, the key that would unlock every family secret. That night, in the uneasy quiet of my bedroom, I studied the phone again. The lock screen was my granddaughter's birthday photo. Suddenly, I realized it might be the password hint. After several failed guesses, the screen finally opened. A rush of excitement and dread swept over me as I discovered a hidden folder, marked only with an eye-shaped icon named Record. Inside, dozens of audio files. Most slipped past my attention until one file caught me cold. Final confession. It took everything in me not to press play right away. Pride, perhaps, or fear that all my suspicions would crumble. Finally, heart hammering, I listened. My mother's voice, low and gravelly, filled my ears. With halting breaths, she confessed why she'd bought a second phone, why she'd made those transfers, and why Minsu's name appeared so often. After Youngsu's business collapsed, she'd been overwhelmed by repeated pleas for help and nightly anxieties. Desperate for order, she'd requested Minsu, adept with numbers and discreet, to manage her finances. Afraid that Youngsu, spying these arrangements, would ask for more, she used the second phone to keep things quiet. She asked that I hold on to the house, never selling it in haste. In her words, it was our final thread, the one last thing tying our family to itself. She pleaded for patience, not division, at least until enough time had passed to heal everyone's wounds. But there was more. Her confession deepened the twist like a knife. From her tiny account, she'd sent Youngsu far more than I ever guessed. Amounts she could not admit to me while alive. She feared if I knew, I'd come to resent my own brother, so she kept her silence and relied on Minsu to cover her tracks. If, one day, I was to find out, she hoped it would come with understanding, not anger. She explained that Minsu had tried hard not to show any of this in front of the family, had paid bills directly, sometimes routing the money through his own account, and kept records so I could know the truth if the time ever came. As her words ended, I sat in the dark, feeling as if I'd been set alone in a great, empty field. My hard-won suspicions, the ones I'd built my anger on, now trembled like a battered old door. Across that threshold, Minsu's face flickered anew, and for a moment I could not move. All the words I'd flung like arrows at my brother, my daughters, even at myself, echoed back in shameful loops. By dawn, I stood on the cold veranda as the scent of an awakening market drifted up from the street below. I bowed my head, truly bowed it, inside myself, for the first time in years. I understood then how pride, carried too long, can turn as sharp as a blade. Replaying the message, I followed every transfer again. And, as my mother said, each sum sent to Minsu ended up paying her raw hospital and pharmacy bills, with what little left going toward my grandchildren's school fees. Red ink faded into black records. Later that day, I gathered my family. I put the phone on the table, laid my feelings bare, and explained every twist of suspicion and my mother's confession. I apologized to Minsu, tracing the condensation on my cup, ashamed at my suspicion and the sharpness of my words. He met my eyes at last, and Mi-jung, my eldest, let out a long, shaky sigh. Jongi squeezed my hand under the table. Young-soo avoided my gaze, but I saw his shoulder tremble. His own silent apology, or perhaps resentment, I will never know. The disputes, of course, didn't vanish overnight. Legal letters piled up, thickening old tensions. But, as my mother asked, I refused to sell the house for now. I tried in small ways to begin conversations with Young-soo, a slow, difficult thaw after years of blaming each other for our own wounds. I realized how easily everyone believes their suffering is heavier than the next person's. Weeks passed, and one morning a neighbor pulled me aside, hinting that rumors about my fight with my son-in-law were circulating. I almost laughed. People need stories more than they need facts, and the truth, when stretched by distance, becomes almost unrecognizable. Back at home, I stared at my reflection, still wreathed in my mother's voice all these weeks later. Arguments with Young-soo persisted. He insisted on recalculating every caregiving expense, every allowance. I kept my answers factual, softening with my mother's voice as my guide. His demands were sometimes fair and sometimes petty, just as my own stubbornness was a shield and a shackle. By day, I waded through legal documents. By night, I counted numbers on the ceiling, searching for what would finally lift the weight. Min-soo, too, kept his distance, allowing me the time I needed to mend my wounds, and perhaps it was the right kind of distance, one that held space for healing rather than resentment. It took several weeks before things shifted. One quiet evening in my mother's old room, I played her last message again. She spoke with a sigh-laced laugh, as if she saw the futility in all our rushing, all our quarrels. I felt every word. I understood now. The truly strong are those who tell the truth slowly, not those who shout it first. I decided not to call Young-soo, but to write him. I filled each line with memories of childhood, of sweet summer melons and winter wood smoke, and explained how these knots would need patience and time to untangle. His reply, when it came days later, was terse but honest. Between the stiff lines I sensed guilt and relief mixing, an imperfect peace, but enough to begin melting the frost. Meanwhile, my relationship with Min-soo inched toward repair. One evening, he set down a stack of hospital bills, pharmacy receipts, and account printouts, painstakingly sorted, exact in every detail. Between those numbers, I saw my mother's last acts of love and Min-soo's patient loyalty. It finally dawned on me. What I had treated as evidence of betrayal was, in fact, a record of every small kindness I had missed. With trembling hands, I gathered my family for a final confession of my own. I owned up to my stubbornness, my groundless suspicions toward Min-soo, and the harm my words had caused him. I asked, quietly, that we fix up the house together rather than rush to sell it. Patch up the damp wallpaper, mend the old windows, repair ourselves before dividing numbers. Not everyone agreed out loud, but that evening, at the far end of the dinner table, I felt the faintest spark of warmth, not the obvious kind, but something gentle and persistent, shifting each of us a little closer together. As the months slipped by, legal proceedings ebbed, and peace reclaimed its place. Fragile, but real, Young-soo learned to set down his burdens a little more lightly. I learned to soothe my own anxiety before it calcified into suspicion. Min-soo, still marked by the conflict, no longer recoiled from my gaze. The old phone now rests quietly in my drawer. Sometimes I take it out, polish the smudges, and recall that my hands, once so certain, now first seek the warmth in others before they count up evidence. We all carry secret pockets, whether a second phone, an untold sorrow, or a final confession. What truly matters is not just what's kept inside, but when and how we're ready to take it out and share it. I still remember my mother's labored breath, how she reached across time to steady me. In the end, what really binds us isn't a judge's verdict, but those late, honest gestures, sometimes clumsy, always real, that keep a family together. When pain and suspicion collide, do you choose trust, or do you lock yourself away? Perhaps the real strength is in waiting, and in listening all the way to the end.